You've probably heard the term Adam's apple a million times. It's just one of those things we say. But have you ever stopped to think about where that name actually comes from? Well, the story behind it is this amazing trip through anatomy, language, and even art history. So let's get into it. So on the one hand, you have the very official, very clinical name for it, the laryngeal prominence. And on the other hand, you've got the name we all know, the Adam's apple. One is pure science, the other is pure myth. So how did this simple little bump on our throats get all tangled up in one of the oldest, most famous stories ever told? That's the big question we're going to tackle. And trust me, this is more than just a quick anatomy lesson. It's kind of like a detective story that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time. Okay, first things first, let's cover the basics, what the bump actually is physically, and then the famous myth that gave it its name. So, scientifically speaking, that bump is the laryngeal prominence. It's basically the front part of your thyroid cartilage sticking out. And its main job is to act like a little shield, a bodyguard, protecting your super important vocal cords, which are right behind it. Now, you've probably noticed it's a lot more prominent on guys. That all happens during puberty. The larynx, your voice box, gets bigger, which makes the vocal cords inside get longer. And that growth is what causes the voice to deepen and the cartilage to push forward, creating that noticeable bump. And now for the story we all kind of know, right? The folktale goes that when Adam took a bite of that forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, a piece of it got stuck in his throat. It was supposed to be a permanent, physical reminder of that first sin. It's a simple, pretty memorable story. But is it the whole story? And this is where our little investigation takes a really interesting turn. Because to understand the name, you first have to understand the fruit. And that, it turns out, is a huge mystery all on its own. All right, here's the first bombshell for you. The Bible, it never, ever says the forbidden fruit was an apple. Not once. It just calls it the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The whole apple idea, that came much, much later. So if it wasn't an apple, then what was it? Well, scholars have been debating this for centuries. Some candidates included the fig, since Adam and Eve used fig leaves to cover up. Others suggested grapes because of their connection to wine. Pomegranates were another popular choice. And get this, some even argued for wheat. I love this quote from the Talmud because it shows you just how creative people got with this. The theory here is that grain is what awakens a child's mind, what gives them real consciousness. It's this fascinating link between the fruit, knowledge, and the very beginnings of human civilization. Okay, so if the Bible doesn't say apple, how did that one specific fruit end up becoming the absolute star of the show? The answer, as it turns out, is a fantastic case of linguistic confusion. The explanation you'll hear most often is that this all comes down to a neat little pun in Latin. The word for apple, malum, sounds almost exactly like the word for evil, malum. It seems to fit perfectly, right? A fruit literally called evil is the source of the knowledge of evil. But here's the plot twist. Modern scholars have sifted through tons of old Latin texts, and they've found that this clever little pun almost never shows up. The people who were actually writing in Latin at the time just didn't make that connection. So, as cool as it sounds, the pun theory is probably wrong. The real culprit is actually way more interesting. It's just a word that changed its meaning over time. In Latin, the general word for any kind of fruit was pomum. That word evolved into pomme in Old French, and it still just meant fruit. But by the 12th century, the French word pomme had narrowed its meaning to refer to one specific fruit, the apple. And right there, that's the aha moment. All of a sudden, when French speakers were reading their Bibles, a line that originally just meant Adam ate a fruit was now being understood as Adam ate an apple. Just like that, a simple linguistic shift accidentally picked the forbidden fruit for an entire culture. So, a language quirk put the apple into the story. But what made it stick? What made it so iconic? For that, we have to stop looking at words and start looking at pictures. Once the idea was out there, the great artists of the Renaissance just ran with it. I mean, you had masters like Dürer, Cronach, and Rubens all painting the fall of man, and they put a big, shiny, tempting apple right at the center of the action, and their influence was massive. This is the serpent's big sales pitch to Eve. It is the absolute peak of the drama, the ultimate moment of temptation. And that's what these artists were capturing. The apple became the perfect visual symbol for that powerful, dangerous promise.
So through art, something that started as a translation error in French got transformed into one of the most powerful, instantly recognizable symbols in all of Western culture. In our collective imagination, the apple became the forbidden fruit.
Okay, so now we know how the apple got into the story. Let's zoom back out for a second. What does this story, with or without an apple, actually mean? And how did this whole thing circle all the way back to our anatomy? Because really, the debate over the fruit is fascinating, but it's not the main event. The act of eating the fruit is what's central, and it's interpreted very, very differently across different traditions. Let's just take a quick look here. In a lot of Christian interpretations, this act is understood as original sin, a willful disobedience of God's command. In Islam, it's often viewed more as a mistake, a slip-up, for which Adam was ultimately forgiven. And in Jewish tradition, looking at the Torah, it's often about gaining knowledge of good and evil. A forbidden step, sure, but a step that leads towards a more complex human existence. And all of that brings us right back to the beginning. The laryngeal prominence, a simple piece of cartilage, got the nickname Adam's apple because it became a physical marker for this incredibly rich, layered story. A story shaped by a translation mistake, made famous by artists, and interpreted by different faiths for thousands of years.
In a way, the name itself is like a linguistic fossil, preserving this whole complicated history. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a story this amazing is hiding behind a term as common as Adam's apple, what other incredible histories are just waiting to be discovered in the words we use every single day?